Hi, feminine ladies. Welcome back to the Feminine Standard, where we balance softness, build boundaries, and become all that God has created us to be. I pray that you've been well. Today's video is sponsored by Grace Over Grind, my latest ebook, 10 Steps to Reclaiming Your Purpose, Your peace without losing your femininity. A lot of us have been trained and taught to be these ambitious women, but we did that or learned that with the sacrifice of our femininity, meaning that our femininity was lost while we became these ambitious women. And yes, God wants you to strive for the things that He's placed in front of you, or rather, He wants you to be successful and accomplished, but He doesn't want you to do it without Him. And God created us as women to be soft, and I want to make sure that you are remembering how to be your soft, healed, best self as you go and forge forward and become all that God has created you to be. So if you want the link to the book, not comment. You can comment Grace if you want, and I can send you the link, or you can just look at the description of this video. It's linked there as well as on my Instagram and my TikTok. So lately I've been really fascinated with the concept of God's permissible will versus God's perfect will. And when we look at those two concepts, the permissive will is what God permits, meaning it's allowed. But just because something in the Bible was allowed doesn't mean that it was His perfect will, meaning it's without flaw, it's just absolute amazing, it's wonderful, it's what He ideally would want and has planned for each and every one of us. For example, someone could look at the story of Sarah and Abraham and say that since God allowed Ishmael to be born by way of at Abraham sleeping with Hagar, I believe that's her name, Sarah's sister, the concubine that they took, that means that God is allowing us to allow our sisters or our cousins or whoever we choose to have a sexual relationship with our husband if for whatever reason we are unable to carry our own child. Just because God permitted it and allowed it to be in the Bible does not mean that that was His perfect will, because as we see later on in the text in Genesis, we see that God spoke and said, no, the promise is coming, but it's going to come birthed by Sarah. Even in her old age, she will birth Isaac, and Abraham will be the father of many nations. Sarah will be the mother of many nations, and Isaac will be the one who is blessed beyond measure. And then you see his life unfold. Ishmael will then be cursed because you created your own version of the promise coming to pass with what your permissive will is, because we have free will. God's not going to make us do everything that He wants us to do, but He will give us very solid no's. He will point us in the right direction. And if we keep missing the signs and we go our own permissive way, He will allow it. And then we will see that it's far from the perfect will, which we see in that story was for Isaac to be born from Sarah, not Hagar, not anybody else, Sarah, and for Abraham to have been the father in the timing that God designated. The other difference or example of a permissive will versus a perfect will, I wanted to get into the story of, in Genesis 24, we see when Abraham was ready for Isaac to be married, he set out his servant to go find a wife for Isaac. And in going and finding that wife, when the angel gave him the sign of who that woman would be, that was ideally the wife for Isaac, he still had to ask her, do you want to come with me to this foreign land to marry Isaac, to be presented to him as a wife? She had to say yes. They needed agreement. Again, free will is what God gives us, so he has to make sure that we are agreeing to his process before something happens. He's not just going to say, you have to marry somebody. She has to marry Isaac and you have to come with me. She had to still give her consent. And then even when she came to Isaac, he had to again say, yes, I do want to marry her, because he had free will. He could have just stayed in the field and just been daydreaming all day long and never gotten married, or he could have decided to marry someone else. But instead, he also, with his free will, decided to move with the perfect will of God and get married to Rebecca. But in 1 Kings chapter 11, we see that Solomon used his free will to go against God. So now he's no longer in God's perfect will in the area of marriage, because it said that Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, meaning to marry them or have sex with them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. So God gave the warning to him and the rest of the children of Israel not to marry women from specific tribes. But when they went ahead and did marry those women, God allowed it. But that wasn't God's perfect will for Solomon's marital destiny. God's perfect will would have been to bring him a wife, that he would have had a queen, or whatever his will was. We actually don't get that unless there is a text that you've seen. Point me to it in the comments to let me know if there was a text that Solomon got a specific revelation about what his wife would be like. But from First Kings, I have not seen in the Bible that it stated anything about who Solomon's wife would be, what type of queen she would be, or what that family dynamic ideally was to look like. But we do know that God permitted Solomon to do what he wanted because he had free will. But he did tell him that it was not his perfect will for him to marry any of those women, because they did exactly what God warned, which was to turn his heart away from God. And something that my pastor was speaking about today was the anxiety, the fear, the worry. They're like a small chipping away. They're a small falling away from God. When you have those little things that you're now leaning on and you're now trusting in and you're now looking to, as opposed to, God, you don't see it happen all at once. Like Solomon, I'm sure, didn't marry all these women at once. It was one after another, slowly turning his heart away from God. And the same thing happens when we're used to leaning on fear and saying, well, but I don't want this to happen and this to happen and this to happen, instead of saying, God, how can I make this work? Because I don't actually see a way, but my mind is trying to go to fear. God, what way should I take? And in you leaning and trusting in God, he's going to show you more and more of why you should trust him. But when you go and you lean on your own understanding and you acknowledge fear and other things instead of God in all your ways, It's going to be a slow falling away from grace, a slow falling away from obedience into disobedience. Then one day the person will find themselves in all of this mess because little by little they let their hearts be turned away. Little by little they allow themselves to go so deep into their own will that they looked up one day and realized that they were far from God's perfect will. So there's a lot of things that God will allow because, again, He is not a controller. He's not looking to dominate us. He wants us to come willingly, to surrender willingly, to obey and submit willingly. But when we constantly go and do our own thing, He's going to give us over to the reprobate mind. The word does say that God will give us over to those desires. If that's all that we focus on and put our energy on, He's going to say, you know what? You don't want me. Go ahead and do what it is that you want. So I want the next time that you think, well, how did God let this woman marry the wrong man? And I don't understand. How would God let them run a whole ministry and it's an error? God allows us to have free will. He warns us. He lets us know this is the danger. If you open a ministry that leads my sheep astray, this is the danger of you marrying that man that has a twisted bloodline. If you have children outside of wedlock, whatever it is that God specifically warns you about, as well as in His text warns us about through various stories and just plain and simple, and Him saying that these are my commandments, follow them, and if you love me, you will keep my commandments, then we will get the other side of it when we don't do it. But when we do it, we'll see the promises, we'll see the prosperity, the protection that He gives us when we're in His perfect will. I believe somebody, I'm not sure who it was, that was describing it as it's like a protection. When you're in His will, He can protect you. He can keep you safe. But once you go out of the boundary, He can't protect you. He's God. He can do anything He wants, but He set up the world, the universe, the spirit realm, and the physical realm in such a way that He has to follow the laws that He set. That's how just and fair He is. That He's not going to constantly break His rules because you don't want to follow them. He's going to say, no, in order to have the hedge of protection around you, in order to be protected and guarded, to get favor, open heavens, grace, and mercy, you have to stay inside of my boundary line in obedience. The second that you continue disobedience after disobedience, you get further and further away from where I can protect you. So I want us to really understand that this life is mainly about having faith and obedience. And you should want to really be in God's perfect will. I remember for myself personally, there was a matter where I was in God's permissive will. He was going to allow me to do something that would have derailed my destiny. If not in all ways, in some ways. But because He is a God who does not control us, but He wants us to come to Him willingly in all things, to acknowledge Him in all things, and to seek Him first in every area and aspect of our life, He gave me warnings. And He showed me what I needed to see about the situation. And from there, it would have been my decision to go with His perfect will or to stay and be in that area of my life in His permissive will. And I think the reason why people don't always care to be in His perfect will in each and every area of their lives, it's because the permissive will doesn't always seem so bad. It's like, oh, well, I'm still alive. God doesn't strike you down the second that you disobey him, the second that you are going and doing the thing that he told you and warned you not to do. You, by his grace, are given another day of life to learn, to grow, and to reroute yourself back to his perfect path so that you can get the true promises of God. Because that doesn't happen, and because a lot of the stories, whether it's in the Bible or it's in life that you hear about, because that doesn't happen all the time, we often think that it's not that big of a deal. Like King Solomon, he still ended up being rich. God didn't immediately after he married his 700th wife strike him down and kill him that second, or take away all his riches and leave him destitute in poverty. If he did that, then maybe it would be a bit more of a warning, a bit more of a cautionary tale. But if you continue to read the entirety of his story, you will see that God was angry with Solomon. You would see that the way that Solomon was buried, there it wasn't the same honor as his dad and other kings who were acceptable in the sight of the Lord. So you will see, if you continue to read on, that this is not the way you would want things to end. You don't want God's anger to be unleashed onto you, or to be not quenched, but to be ignited because you did not want to be obedient in all things, in all ways. So today, whether it's in your finances, whether it's you as a single woman, or you're married and you are really, really wrestling with God about something because you just want your promise so much that you literally are almost going into witchcraft by way of doing anything to control it just to get what you want. The next time you think and you remember that there's something that you still have not surrendered to God, I'm challenging you to give it to God, because you would be so blessed to do it his perfect way, and you would really be just taking away something so beautiful from yourself by not allowing yourself to just wait and see what is that beautiful, perfect promise that God has been ministering to my heart about. What is it that I should have waited for, that I should wait for? Let God show you, let him speak to you, and focus on that instead of putting your hands in things where they don't belong. So I pray that this episode has blessed you. Again, this video is sponsored by Grace Over Grind, my latest ebook. You can get it in the link in my description. Until next time, bye bye.